A single gunshot pierced the evening air as Fiona Grant ducked behind the bar counter of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her heart racing as wild as a Mustang on open plains. Lusk, Wyoming Territory, 1878, a dusty crossroads town where dreams came to die and secrets festered like wounds in the summer heat. "You think you can hide those books from me, girl?" Ezekiel Blackburn's voice boomed across the empty saloon floor, his heavy boots striking the wooden planks as he approached. "Your pa owed me, and now you owe me. Till that debt's paid, you're mine." Fiona's fingers trembled against the rough wood of the counter. At 22, she'd been trapped in this gilded cage for nearly a year since her father's death. The saloon owner had revealed the gambling debts mere hours after they'd laid her father in the cold Wyoming earth. Now, Ezekiel claimed ownership of both her father's debts and her future. "I wasn't hiding anything," Fiona replied, slowly rising from her crouched position, smoothing her simple blue dress with dignity despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I was merely organizing the accounts as you instructed." Ezekiel's weathered face twisted into a scowl beneath his thick gray mustache. At 53, he ran the most profitable business in Lusk with an iron fist and a ruthless reputation. "Don't you play smart with me," he growled, grabbing her wrist with fingers like steel traps. "I've got the marshal, the mayor, and half the territory's judges in my pocket. You try running, and I'll have you in chains before you cross the county line. You understand me?" Fiona nodded, fighting to keep her expression neutral despite the pain of his grip. She'd seen what happened to girls who defied Ezekiel: the bruises, the broken spirits, sometimes even disappearances explained away as heading back east. Survival meant compliance for now. "The Henderson party will be arriving tonight," Ezekiel continued, releasing her wrist. "Cattle buyers with money to burn. You'll serve them personally and smile while you do it." "Yes, Mr. Blackburn," she answered, rubbing her wrist when his back was turned. As Ezekiel retreated to his office, Fiona returned to wiping down the oak bar top. The saloon was her prison, but it was also her sanctuary. As long as she kept the books and served drinks, Ezekiel mostly left her alone, unlike the other girls who were forced to entertain the customers upstairs. Her father had been the town schoolteacher, respected and educated, until the whiskey and the cards had taken hold after her mother's death. Now, all Fiona had left were memories, a small locket with her parents' portraits, and dreams of escape that grew more distant with each passing day. The afternoon dragged on as Fiona prepared the saloon for the evening crowd. She arranged glasses, wiped tables, and tried to ignore the lewd comments from Ezekiel's enforcers who loitered by the doorway. At sunset, the piano player, a kindly older man named Walter, arrived to begin his nightly performance. "Evening, Miss Fiona," Walter greeted, his rheumatic fingers already testing the keys. "You're looking tired today." "Just the usual, Walter," Fiona replied with a small smile. Walter was one of the few bright spots in her life at the saloon, a grandfather figure who watched over her when he could, though his position was nearly as precarious as her own. As dusk settled over Lusk, the saloon doors swung open, admitting trail dust and the evening's first patrons. The Henderson party, 5 boisterous cattle buyers from Kansas City, claimed the largest table and immediately called for whiskey. Ezekiel emerged from his office, all smiles and false hospitality, directing Fiona to attend to their every need. The night wore on, the saloon filling with the usual mix of cowboys, ranch hands, miners, and townspeople. The air grew thick with cigar smoke and the stench of spilled beer. Fiona moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her tray balanced expertly despite the wandering hands that occasionally reached for her. It was nearly midnight when the saloon doors swung open once more, admitting a blast of cool night air and a tall, solitary figure. The newcomer paused in the doorway, surveying the room with a deliberate gaze before stepping fully into the light. Fiona nearly dropped her tray. He stood over 6 feet tall, his frame lean but powerful beneath a worn leather duster. Dark hair curled beneath a wide-brimmed black hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught Fiona's attention, ice blue and alert, taking in every detail of the room with calm intelligence. "Whiskey," he said simply as he approached the bar, his voice deep but quiet. He moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger, to being watched. Fiona set down her tray and moved behind the bar, reaching for a glass and the bottle of better whiskey they reserved for discerning customers. Something about this stranger told her he would notice the difference. "You're new to Lusk," she said, pouring his drink. It wasn't a question. "Just passing through," he replied, laying a silver dollar on the counter. Their fingers brushed as he took the glass, and Fiona felt an unexpected jolt at the brief contact. "Name's Isaiah Xavier." Fiona nodded, suddenly aware of Ezekiel watching from across the room. Conversation with customers was acceptable, encouraged even, to keep them drinking, but Ezekiel had a sixth sense for detecting genuine interest. "Fiona Grant," she replied, keeping her voice professional. "What brings you to our little corner of Wyoming, Mr. Xavier?" Isaiah took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. "Business. The kind that requires discretion." Before Fiona could respond, Ezekiel materialized beside her, his heavy hand settling on her shoulder with proprietary pressure. "Welcome to the Silver Dollar," Ezekiel said, his friendly tone belied by the cold calculation in his eyes as he assessed the newcomer. "We don't often get strangers this time of year." Isaiah tipped his hat slightly. "Mr. Blackburn, I presume?" "Your establishment's reputation extends beyond Lusk." Something in Isaiah's tone, a subtle edge beneath the courtesy, made Fiona glance sharply at him. Ezekiel's grip on her shoulder tightened fractionally. "All good things, I hope," Ezekiel replied with a tight smile. "That would depend on one's definition of good," Isaiah answered, taking another sip of whiskey. The tension between the men was palpable, though Fiona couldn't understand its source. Ezekiel clearly recognized something in Isaiah that she didn't, something that made him wary. "Fiona," Ezekiel said without looking at her, "the gentlemen at table 3 need attending." It was a dismissal, and Fiona knew better than to ignore it. With a last curious glance at Isaiah Xavier, she slipped away from the bar, wondering what silent communication had passed between the two men. Throughout the evening, Fiona found her attention repeatedly drawn to the stranger. Unlike most patrons, he nursed his single whiskey, watching the room with those perceptive blue eyes. Occasionally, she caught him looking at her, his gaze neither lewd nor pitying but assessing, as if he were solving a complex equation. Near closing time, the Henderson party had devolved into drunken rowdiness. One man, red-faced and slurring, grabbed Fiona's arm as she collected empty glasses from their table. "How about you show me to my room, pretty thing?" he drawled, pulling her closer. "I'm afraid I just serve the drinks, sir," Fiona replied evenly, trying to extricate herself without causing a scene that would anger Ezekiel. "Lucy or Sadie can help you upstairs." The man's grip tightened. "Don't want them, want you?" Fiona looked desperately toward Walter, but the piano player was an old man with little influence. Ezekiel was nowhere to be seen, likely counting the night's earnings in his office. "The lady declined," came a quiet voice from behind her. Isaiah Xavier stood there, his posture relaxed but somehow radiating danger. "I suggest you respect that." The drunk released Fiona's arm, standing unsteadily. "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" Isaiah didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "Just a man who believes in good manners." Something in his calm demeanor made the drunk hesitate. His companions, sensing trouble, pulled him back down to his chair, murmuring about plenty of other girls and not worth fighting over. With a barely perceptible nod to Fiona, Isaiah returned to his place at the bar. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, but it left Fiona breathless, confused by the stranger's intervention and fearful of Ezekiel's reaction if he discovered it. As the saloon finally emptied in the early hours of the morning, Fiona began the nightly cleanup routine, gathering glasses and wiping down tables while Walter closed up the piano. Isaiah Xavier remained at the bar, now in quiet conversation with Sam, the bartender. Ezekiel emerged from his office, counting a stack of bills before tucking them into his vest pocket. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Isaiah still present, "We're closing, mister," he announced, approaching the bar. "Sam, why is this man still here?" Sam, a burly man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, shrugged. "Paid for a room upstairs, number 4, Ezekiel frowned. "Number 4 is reserved for special guests. You were busy with the cattle buyers," Sam explained. "He paid double." Fiona kept her head down, pretending to concentrate on her work while listening intently. Room 4 was directly across from her own small quarters at the end of the hallway. "Very well," Ezekiel conceded reluctantly, "but I expect you gone by tomorrow evening, Mr. Xavier." "We have regular clientele to accommodate." Isaiah inclined his head slightly. "Of course, I appreciate your hospitality." As Ezekiel turned away, his gaze fell on Fiona. "Girl, once you're finished here, bring fresh towels to room 4, then straight to your room, I'll be checking." The implicit threat in his last words was clear. Ezekiel regularly checked on his female employees, especially when he suspected any inappropriate interest in a customer. "Yes, Mr. Blackburn," Fiona answered dutifully. When Ezekiel had disappeared back into his office, Fiona hurriedly finished her cleaning and retrieved fresh linens from the storeroom. Her mind raced with questions about the mysterious Isaiah Xavier. There was something about him beyond his timely intervention with the drunk that suggested he was not an ordinary drifter. Climbing the narrow back stairs to the upper floor, Fiona made her way down the dimly lit hallway. Most of the rooms were occupied by the saloon girls or overnight guests, though all was quiet now in the pre-dawn hours. She stopped before room 4, balancing the towels in one arm as she knocked softly. The door opened immediately, as if Isaiah had been waiting. He'd removed his hat and duster, standing before her in a simple white shirt and dark trousers, his gunbelt still buckled around his hips. "Your towels, Mr. Xavier," Fiona said formally, conscious of Ezekiel's warning and the possibility of being observed. Isaiah stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. After a moment's hesitation, Fiona stepped inside. The room was standard for the Silver Dollar, a brass bed, washstand, small writing desk, and window overlooking the main street. "Thank you, Miss Grant," Isaiah said, closing the door but leaving it slightly ajar, a courtesy that Fiona appreciated. "I wonder if I might ask you something?" Fiona placed the towels on the washstand, then turned to face him, maintaining a proper distance. "What would you like to know, Mr. Xavier?" Isaiah studied her for a long moment. "How long has Blackburn been holding you against your will?" The blunt question stunned Fiona into silence. She opened her mouth to deny it, the automatic response drilled into her by months of Ezekiel's threats, but found she couldn't form the words under Isaiah's knowing gaze. "I'm not." She began, then faltered. "You don't have to pretend," Isaiah said quietly. "I've been tracking Blackburn's operation across 3 territories. I know what he does, the debts he manufactures, the people he traps." Fiona's knees suddenly felt weak. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her composure cracking for the first time in months. "My father's gambling debts. After he died, Ezekiel claimed I inherited them, said I'd work here until they were paid. But the amount keeps growing." Isaiah nodded grimly. "It always does, that's how his system works." "Who are you?" Fiona whispered, hope and suspicion warring within her. "A lawman." A shadow crossed Isaiah's face. "I used to be U.S. Marshal out of Denver." He touched his side briefly, suggesting an old injury. "Now I work privately." "For whom?" "For justice," he answered simply. Then, seeing her skeptical expression, he added, "And for the Pinkerton Detective Agency when the cases align with my personal interests." Fiona's eyes widened. The Pinkertons were famous or infamous, depending on who you asked. "You're here to arrest Ezekiel," Isaiah shook his head. "Local law enforcement is compromised, as you well know. I'm gathering evidence for a federal case: trafficking, extortion, murder. Blackburn's saloons are just the visible part of a much larger criminal enterprise. And what does that have to do with me?" Fiona asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I need someone on the inside," Isaiah confirmed. "Someone who has access to his books, who can document the pattern of debt slavery, someone who wants freedom as badly as I want Blackburn behind bars." The proposition hung in the air between them, tantalizing and terrifying. Fiona stood, moving to the window where she could look down on the empty street, the sleeping town that had become her prison. "He'll kill me if he suspects," she said softly. "He's done it before." "I know," Isaiah acknowledged. "I won't pretend it isn't dangerous, but I can offer you protection and a way out of Lusk when it's over." Fiona turned back to him, searching his face for any sign of deception. "Why should I trust you, Mr. Xavier? For all I know, this could be another one of Ezekiel's tests." Instead of answering immediately, Isaiah reached inside his shirt and withdrew a folded document, offering it to her. Fiona took it cautiously, opening it to reveal official Pinkerton credentials and a letter of authorization signed by the agency's superintendent. "Because unlike Blackburn," Isaiah said as she examined the papers, "I keep my promises." Something in his steady gaze, a fundamental decency that couldn't be feigned, made Fiona want to believe him. After a year of calculating every word, every action for survival, the possibility of an ally was almost overwhelming. "I should go," she said, handing back the documents. "Ezekiel will be checking the hallway soon." Isaiah nodded, returning the papers to their hiding place. "Think about what I've said. I'll be here tomorrow night as well, despite what I told Blackburn. If you decide to help, bring me a bottle of whiskey after 10. If not," he shrugged. "I'll understand." Fiona slipped out of the room, her mind reeling with the conversation. As she made her way to her own small room at the end of the hall, she heard Ezekiel's heavy tread on the stairs. Quickly, she entered her quarters and closed the door, leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing heart. Through the thin walls, she could hear Ezekiel moving down the hallway, checking doors. His footsteps paused outside her room and the doorknob turned slowly. Fiona sprang into action, hastily removing her shoes and lying on her narrow bed, feigning sleep. The door creaked open, and she felt Ezekiel's gaze on her for long, uncomfortable moments before the door closed again. His footsteps continued down the hall, and Fiona released the breath she'd been holding. Sleep eluded her that night as she weighed Isaiah Xavier's proposition against the risks. If she helped him and they failed, Ezekiel would ensure her death was slow and painful. If she refused, she remained trapped indefinitely, with her situation likely to worsen as Ezekiel tired of her refusals to join his upstairs girls. But if they succeeded, freedom. The word itself seemed foreign after so many months of captivity. Dawn was breaking by the time Fiona made her decision. The next day passed in a blur of routine tasks. Fiona swept floors, stocked the bar, and polished glasses mechanically while her mind worked through contingency plans. She needed access to Ezekiel's private ledgers, the ones he kept locked in his office safe, not the doctored books he maintained for occasional inspection by territorial officials. Midday found her serving lunch to the few regular customers who frequented the saloon during daylight hours. Isaiah Xavier was not among them, having presumably left his room early to maintain the pretense of conducting business in town. "You're distracted today," observed Walter as he sat at the piano, idly playing scales to prepare for the evening's entertainment. "Something troubling you, Miss Fiona?" Fiona glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Just tired, Walter. Didn't sleep well." The old piano player nodded sympathetically, but his shrewd eyes suggested he knew there was more to it. Walter had been at the Silver Dollar longer than anyone except Ezekiel himself and had seen countless girls come and go. "That stranger seemed to take a shine to you," he commented casually, his fingers still moving across the keys. The tall fellow with the blue eyes. Fiona tensed. Mr. Xavier was simply being polite. Walter's hands paused on the piano. "Be careful, girl," he said quietly. "Blackburn doesn't share his possessions, and he considers you very much his property." Before Fiona could respond, the saloon's front door opened, admitting Ezekiel and two men she recognized as business associates from Cheyenne. Ezekiel's eyes narrowed when he spotted her conversing with Walter instead of working. "Fiona," he barked, "bring coffee to my office for me and my guests. Then prepare the private dining room for lunch." "Yes, Mr. Blackburn," she replied, hurrying to the kitchen to fetch the coffee service. As she approached Ezekiel's office minutes later, balancing a heavy tray of coffee, cups, and accoutrements, she heard raised voices from within. She paused outside the closed door, straining to hear. Shipment was intercepted near Casper. An unfamiliar voice was saying. Territorial marshals seized everything, the girls, the opium, all of it. Impossible, Ezekiel growled. We paid off the right people. Someone's been talking, the second visitor added. Word is there's a federal investigation building. Ezekiel's response was too low to hear, but the fury in his tone was unmistakable. Fiona's heart raced. Was this connected to Isaiah's investigation? She knocked on the door, composing her features into a neutral expression when Ezekiel yanked it open. His face was flushed with anger, but he stepped aside to allow her entry. Put it there, he directed, gesturing to his desk. Fiona placed the tray down carefully, avoiding eye contact with the two visitors, hard-faced men with the cold eyes of predators. As she arranged the cups, she noticed a ledger open on Ezekiel's desk, hastily covered with a newspaper when she entered. Will there be anything else, sir? She asked, keeping her voice meek. That's all, Ezekiel dismissed her with a wave. And tell Sam I don't want to be disturbed for the next hour. As Fiona exited the office, closing the door behind her, her mind raced with the implications of what she'd overheard. The ledger, it had to be the real financial record, not the public-facing books she was allowed to maintain. And now she knew Ezekiel was already on edge about a possible investigation. The timing couldn't be worse for what she was planning. Or perhaps it couldn't be better. The afternoon dragged on as Fiona prepared the private dining room, served lunch to Ezekiel and his associates, then resumed her regular duties. By evening, the saloon was filling with its usual crowd, the piano music and raucous laughter creating a cocoon of noise that made private conversation impossible. Shortly after 8 o'clock, Isaiah Xavier entered the saloon. He nodded politely to Fiona as he took a seat at a corner table, positioning himself with his back to the wall and a clear view of both the entrance and Ezekiel's office. He ordered a whiskey and a plate of stew from one of the other girls, seemingly no more interested in Fiona than in any other employee. Ezekiel, still occupied with his visitors in the private dining room, hadn't yet emerged to monitor the main saloon floor. Fiona used the opportunity to circulate among the tables, gathering empty glasses and wiping down surfaces, gradually working her way toward Isaiah. When she reached his table, she leaned down slightly, ostensibly to collect his empty whiskey glass. 10 o'clock, she murmured, barely moving her lips. I'll bring the bottle. Isaiah gave no visible reaction beyond a slight nod as he handed her the glass, but as their fingers brushed, he pressed something small and cold into her palm. Fiona closed her hand around it quickly, slipping whatever it was into her pocket without examining it. The next 2 hours passed with excruciating slowness. Ezekiel finally emerged from the private dining room with his associates, all 3 men looking grim but satisfied, as if unpleasant business had been concluded. Ezekiel stationed himself at his usual table near the bar, from which he could observe the entire saloon. At 5 minutes to 10, Fiona approached Sam at the bar. Mr. Xavier in room 4 asked for a bottle of the good whiskey, she said, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. Said he'd pay extra for it to be brought up. Sam glanced toward Ezekiel, who was now engaged in conversation with the town's banker. Take it up then, Sam grunted, reaching for a bottle of their better stock. But come straight back down, I need help with this crowd. Fiona nodded, taking the bottle and 2 clean glasses. The second glass was a risk, but a calculated one if she was seen. She could claim Xavier had company and required an additional glass. As she ascended the back stairs, Fiona's heart pounded so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. The hallway was mercifully empty, most of the saloon girls still downstairs working the crowd. She knocked softly on Isaiah's door. He opened it immediately, ushering her inside and closing it quietly behind her. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the sparse furnishings. You came, Isaiah said, a note of approval in his deep voice. I want out, Fiona replied simply, setting down the bottle and glasses on the small table. Whatever it takes. Isaiah nodded, gesturing for her to sit in the room's only chair while he perched on the edge of the bed. What did you find in my hand earlier? Fiona reached into her pocket and withdrew the object, a small key fashioned from what appeared to be a bent hairpin. What does it open? Nothing yet, Isaiah explained, but with some wax it can be pressed into a lock to create an impression. From that, I can make a key that will open Blackburn's office or safe, whichever you can get access to. Fiona's eyes widened with understanding. I heard something today, she told him, recounting the conversation she'd overheard between Ezekiel and his visitors. They're worried about a federal investigation, something about girls and opium being seized near Casper. Isaiah's expression darkened. That would be the Baker Creek operation. Not my case, but related. Blackburn's network is extensive saloons and brothels across Wyoming and into Colorado, all fronts for human trafficking and opium distribution. How do you know all this? Fiona asked, pouring a small amount of whiskey into each glass to maintain their cover story if interrupted. I've been building this case for over a year, Isaiah replied, accepting the glass but not drinking. Blackburn's careful, he insulates himself with layers of subordinates, keeps his personal involvement difficult to prove. That's why I need documentation of his financial operations. The real ledgers are in his office safe, Fiona confirmed. I caught a glimpse today. But I've never seen him open it. Isaiah leaned forward, his blue eyes intense in the lamplight. Can you get into his office when he's not there, long enough for me to work on the safe? Fiona considered the question carefully. Possibly. He usually leaves for the bank around 11 each morning, returns by noon. Sam watches the front of the saloon, but he often naps in the storeroom this time of year. The summer heat makes him drowsy. Tomorrow, then, Isaiah decided. When Blackburn leaves, find an excuse to be near his office. I'll slip in through the back entrance. The plan was simple but fraught with danger. If they were caught, Ezekiel would show no mercy. What happens after? Fiona asked, voicing the question that had troubled her since their first conversation. Even if you get evidence, you said yourself the local law is corrupt. I have a federal marshal waiting in Cheyenne, Isaiah explained. Once I have the documentation, I'll send a telegram. He'll arrive with a proper force within days. And in the meantime, Ezekiel will know someone betrayed him. Isaiah's expression softened slightly. You won't be here. Once we have what we need, we leave immediately. I have horses stabled at the livery under another name. The prospect of immediate escape was both thrilling and terrifying. Fiona had dreamed of leaving Lusk for so long, but now that the possibility was real, the dangers seemed equally substantial. What about the other girls? She asked, thinking of Lucy, Sadie, and the others trapped in Ezekiel's web of debt and threats. The federal raid will free them, Isaiah assured her. But we can't warn them without risking exposure. Sometimes to save many, we must start by saving one. Fiona nodded slowly, understanding the harsh calculus of their situation. Tomorrow, then. A creak in the hallway made both of them freeze. Footsteps approached Isaiah's door, paused, then continued past. Fiona released a shaky breath. I should go, she whispered, before I'm missed. Isaiah rose, moving to the door and opening it a crack to check the hallway. Clear, he murmured, turning back to her. Fiona, are you certain about this? Once we start, there's no turning back. In the lamplight, his features were cast in sharp relief, the strong jawline, the slight scar above his right eyebrow, the eyes that seemed to see through pretense to the truth beneath. There was concern in those eyes now, genuine concern for her safety. I've been trapped here for nearly a year, Fiona answered, squaring her shoulders with newfound resolve. Every day I stay is another day of my life stolen, I'm certain. Isaiah nodded, a flash of admiration crossing his face. Until tomorrow, then. Fiona slipped out into the hallway, the empty glass in her hand, providing a plausible explanation for her presence if questioned. As she descended the stairs to rejoin the chaotic saloon floor, she felt lighter than she had in months. Tomorrow might bring freedom or disaster, but at least she was finally taking action rather than merely surviving. The remainder of the night passed in a blur of serving drinks and avoiding wandering hands. Ezekiel, preoccupied with his business concerns, paid her little attention beyond his usual watchful surveillance. By the time the last customers staggered out and the saloon girls led their chosen companions upstairs, Fiona was exhausted but too wired to sleep. In her small room, she sat on the edge of her bed, fingering the locket that contained the only images she had of her parents. What would they think of her now? Her mother, who had taught her to play piano and speak French before consumption took her when Fiona was 12. Her father, once respected as an educator before grief drove him to ruin. "I'm getting out, Papa," she whispered to the tiny portrait. "I'm not letting your mistakes determine my future." When sleep finally came, it was fitful and filled with dreams of pursuit of running through endless saloon corridors while Ezekiel's laughter echoed behind her. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through Fiona's small window. She dressed carefully in her simplest dress, the one that would be most practical for riding if they managed to escape later. Beneath it, she wore her sturdiest undergarments and stockings. In a small cloth pouch tied around her waist, she placed her locket, the few dollars she had managed to save, and a small knife she had pilfered from the kitchen months ago but never found the courage to use. Breakfast at the Silver Dollar was a perfunctory affair: coffee and day-old bread for the staff, heartier fare available for overnight guests. Fiona moved through her morning duties mechanically, acutely aware of Isaiah Xavier seated in the dining room, reading a newspaper and giving no indication that he recognized her beyond a casual nod. At precisely 10:50, Ezekiel emerged from his office dressed in his town clothes, a black suit and polished boots that he reserved for business dealings. "I'm going to the bank," he announced to Sam. "Back by noon. Keep an eye on things." "Yes, boss," Sam replied, already looking drowsy in the summer heat. Fiona's heart began to race as she watched Ezekiel exit the saloon. Through the front windows, she could see him walking up the dusty main street toward the Lusk National Bank. She waited 5 agonizing minutes, then approached Sam with a stack of clean glasses. "Sam, these go in the storeroom," she said, "and I need to get the new invoice book from Mr. Blackburn's office for the liquor delivery this afternoon." Sam yawned, nodding absently. "Go on then. And shut the door to the storeroom proper when you're done. Keeps the flies out." Fiona moved quickly to the storeroom first, placing the glasses on a shelf and confirming that the back entrance, a rarely used door that opened into the alley behind the saloon, was unlocked. Then she made her way to Ezekiel's office, her palms sweating as she turned the knob and stepped inside. The office was exactly as Ezekiel had left it, desk cluttered with papers, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the corner, and the large safe looming against the far wall. Fiona moved to the window, adjusting the shade to signal Isaiah as they had arranged. Within minutes, she heard the soft click of the back door opening and closing. Footsteps approached silently down the hallway, and then Isaiah was there, closing the office door behind him. "We don't have much time," he said without preamble, moving directly to the safe. He examined the lock carefully, then withdrew several slim tools from inside his coat. "Keep watch at the door," he instructed, already focused on the safe's mechanism. "Listen for anyone approaching." Fiona positioned herself by the door, opening it just a crack to monitor the hallway. Behind her, she could hear Isaiah working on the safe, the occasional soft metallic scrape punctuating the silence. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Sweat beaded on Fiona's forehead in the stuffy office. From her position, she could see into the main saloon where the morning's first customers were beginning to arrive, mostly travelers stopping for a drink or meal before continuing their journeys. "Almost there," Isaiah murmured, his concentration absolute. Suddenly, Fiona heard a familiar heavy tread on the front porch steps. Her blood ran cold. "Ezekiel's back," she hissed, panic rising in her throat. "Early." Isaiah didn't pause in his work. 30 more seconds. "Be ready to distract him if necessary." Fiona's mind raced as she watched through the crack in the door. Ezekiel entered the saloon, exchanged words with Sam, then started toward the office with purposeful strides. "He's coming now," she whispered urgently. At that moment, there was a soft click from the safe. "Got it," Isaiah said, swinging the heavy door open. Ezekiel's footsteps grew louder in the hallway. Fiona froze, terror paralyzing her momentarily until Isaiah's calm voice broke through her panic. "The back window," he directed, already gathering papers from inside the safe. "Go now." Fiona rushed to the window behind Ezekiel's desk, fumbling with the latch as Isaiah stuffed ledgers and documents into his coat. The window swung open just as the office door handle began to turn. With surprising strength, Isaiah lifted Fiona bodily and helped her through the window into the narrow space between the saloon and the adjacent building. He followed immediately after, pulling the window closed behind them just as the office door opened. Pressed against the rough wooden wall, barely breathing, Fiona could hear Ezekiel moving about inside the office. A moment of silence, then a bellow of rage told her he'd discovered the open safe. "Run," Isaiah whispered, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the back alley. "Stay low." They crouched as they ran, using the buildings for cover, weaving through back alleys away from the main street. Behind them, shouts erupted from the Silver Dollar as Ezekiel raised the alarm. "This way," Isaiah directed, leading her toward the livery stable at the edge of town. "I have horses ready." Fiona's lungs burned as she ran, her skirts hampering her movements. The town was waking up to the commotion, curious faces appearing in windows and doorways. They reached the livery stable just as the first gunshot rang out. Isaiah pushed Fiona inside the dim building, where a startled stable boy looked up from mucking out a stall. "Morning delivery to the Carson Ranch," Isaiah told the boy smoothly, pressing a gold coin into his hand. "We're running late." The boy nodded, clearly recognizing Isaiah from previous arrangements. "Your horses are saddled, sir." "As you requested." 2 horses stood ready in the center aisle, a sturdy chestnut gelding and a smaller bay mare. Isaiah helped Fiona mount the mare, checking the cinches as more shouts echoed from the direction of the saloon. "You ever ridden astride before?" he asked, swinging up onto his own mount. "My father taught me," Fiona replied, gathering the reins with trembling hands. Her skirts bunched awkwardly around her legs, but there was no time for adjustments. "Stay close to me," Isaiah instructed as they guided their horses out the back of the livery. "We're heading north first, then east toward the railroad at Fort Laramie." They emerged onto a narrow track leading away from town, urging their horses into a canter as soon as they cleared the buildings. Fiona glanced back to see figures spilling out of the saloon onto the main street. Ezekiel's bulky form gesticulating wildly as he organized a pursuit. "They're coming after us," she called to Isaiah, who nodded grimly. "Expected as much. We have about a 15-minute head start. Make it count." They rode hard across the open Wyoming landscape, the summer sun beating down mercilessly. Fiona's body protested the unaccustomed exertion, but fear and determination drove her onward. Isaiah set a punishing pace, occasionally checking behind them for signs of pursuit. After nearly an hour of hard riding, they descended into a shallow creek bed lined with cottonwoods. Isaiah signaled for them to stop, listening intently as their horses drank from the sluggish stream. "I don't hear them," Fiona said hopefully. "They'll have split up to cover more ground," Isaiah replied, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. "We'll rest the horses for 10 minutes, then continue east." Now that the immediate danger of capture had receded somewhat, Fiona became acutely aware of her situation. She had fled Lusk with nothing but the clothes on her back and the few possessions in her waist pouch. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, pursued by a vengeful criminal with connections throughout the territory. "What's in the ledgers?" she asked as Isaiah refilled their canteens from the creek. He pulled one of the books from inside his coat, opening it to show her columns of figures and names. "Everything. Shipments of girls from Chicago and St. Louis, opium distribution routes, bribes to officials." Blackburn documented it all. He was too arrogant to believe anyone would ever see these books but him. Fiona traced a finger down one column of names girls she had known at the Silver Dollar, each with a purchase price and debt recorded beside them. This is monstrous. It's enough to put him away for life, Isaiah confirmed, returning the ledger to his coat. If we make it to Fort Laramie. If, Fiona echoed, her throat suddenly dry despite the water she'd just consumed. Isaiah's expression was somber. Blackburn controls a lot of territory between here and there. We'll need to avoid roads, towns, ranches, anywhere his men might be watching. How far is it to Fort Laramie? About 60 miles as the crow flies. 2 days hard riding, longer if we have to detour. The enormity of their journey settled on Fiona's shoulders. 2 days of running, hiding, sleeping rough with armed men hunting them every step of the way. I've never, she began, then stopped herself. Self-doubt would not serve her now. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Isaiah studied her for a moment, then nodded. First, we need to make you less conspicuous. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a bundle of clothing. These were meant for a young ranch hand I've been working with, but they should fit you well enough. Fiona accepted the bundled denim trousers, a cotton shirt, and a battered hat, men's clothing. Her mother would have been scandalized, but her mother had never had to flee across open country with a price on her head. I'll keep watch while you change, Isaiah said, turning his back and moving to a position where he could monitor their back trail. Fiona ducked behind a cluster of willows, quickly stripping off her dress and petticoats. The men's clothing felt strange against her skin, but as she tucked the shirt into the trousers and rolled up the 2 long legs, she had to admit the practicality of the outfit for their situation. When she emerged, Isaiah gave her an appraising look. Pull your hair up under the hat, he suggested. From a distance, you might pass for a young man. As Fiona complied, she noticed a hint of admiration in his eyes that had nothing to do with her disguise. The realization brought a flush to her cheeks that she blamed on the summer heat. We should move, she said, turning toward her horse. Isaiah caught her arm gently. One more thing. He drew a revolver from his saddlebag and offered it to her, grip first. Do you know how to use this? Fiona hesitated. Her father had owned a rifle for hunting, but she'd never fired a handgun. Not really. It's simple enough, Isaiah explained, showing her how to check the chambers and cock the hammer. Point and squeeze the trigger. Only use it if absolutely necessary. Gunshots carry for miles out here. The weight of the revolver was substantial as Fiona slipped it into the waistband of her borrowed trousers. Like the men's clothing, it represented a step into a world far removed from her previous life. They mounted up and continued eastward, now traveling at a more sustainable pace. Isaiah led them on a winding route that utilized natural features for concealment: dry creek beds, stands of trees, shallow ravines. By mid-afternoon, the sun was merciless, and both horses and riders were showing signs of fatigue. There's an abandoned line shack about 3 miles ahead, Isaiah said as they paused in the shade of a rocky outcropping. Used to belong to the Circle M Ranch before they went under last winter. We can rest there until evening, then push on through the night. Fiona nodded, too exhausted to speak. Her thighs and back ached from hours in the saddle, and dust coated her throat despite the water she'd been sipping from her canteen. They reached the line shack just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. It was a crude structure of rough-hewn logs with a sagging roof and single window, but to Fiona's weary eyes, it looked like a palace. Isaiah checked the interior before allowing her to enter, then tended to the horses while Fiona collapsed onto the shack's only furniture, a narrow cot with a straw-filled mattress. We can't risk a fire, Isaiah said as he entered, carrying their saddlebags. Cold jerky and hardtack for dinner, I'm afraid. Fiona accepted the unappetizing rations gratefully, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. They ate in companionable silence as the light outside faded from gold to purple. You should sleep, Isaiah suggested when they had finished their meager meal. I'll keep watch first, wake you in a few hours. I don't think I could sleep, Fiona admitted, despite her exhaustion. Every time I close my eyes, I see Ezekiel's face. Isaiah settled beside her on the edge of the cot, his presence solid and reassuring. It's normal after what you've been through. The fear doesn't disappear overnight. How long have you been hunting men like him? Fiona asked, studying his profile in the fading light. A muscle tightened in Isaiah's jaw. 5 years. Started after my sister disappeared from a saloon in Denver, taken by men working for Blackburn's organization, though I didn't know it at the time. Did you find her? Fiona asked softly, already dreading the answer. Isaiah's silence was reply enough. After a long moment, he said, I found where they'd buried her, near the Kansas border. His voice was flat, controlled, but Fiona could sense the rage and grief beneath the surface. She was 19, younger than you. Fiona's hand moved instinctively to cover his where it rested on the edge of the cot. I'm sorry. He turned his hand to clasp hers briefly. Get some rest, Fiona. Tomorrow will be harder than today. Despite her protests, exhaustion soon pulled Fiona into sleep. She dreamed of running, of dark figures pursuing her through endless saloon corridors, until a gentle hand on her shoulder brought her back to consciousness. Your turn to watch, Isaiah whispered. Any sign of movement or approaching riders, wake me immediately. Fiona nodded groggily, moving to the single window while Isaiah stretched out on the cot. The night was quiet save for the chirping of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Stars blazed overhead in the clear Wyoming sky, casting enough light for Fiona to make out the shapes of their hobbled horses grazing nearby. The hours of her watch passed slowly. Fiona found herself studying Isaiah as he slept, the strong lines of his face relaxed in repose, one hand still near the gun at his hip. Even in sleep, he remained vigilant. What would happen when this was over? The question had been lurking at the edges of her mind since they fled Lusk. Isaiah spoke of taking the evidence to Fort Laramie, of a federal case against Ezekiel Blackburn. But what then? Would he simply deliver her to safety and continue his hunt for other criminals? The thought brought an unexpected pang of disappointment. Just before dawn, movement on the horizon caught Fiona's attention, a distant dust cloud illuminated by the first faint glow of sunrise. Riders moving fast. Isaiah, she called softly, then more urgently when he didn't immediately stir. Isaiah, wake up, riders coming. He was instantly alert, joining her at the window. How many? I can't tell, maybe 5 or 6, still far off but heading this way. Isaiah's expression hardened. Blackburn's men, they must have found our trail. He began gathering their belongings with swift efficiency. We need to move, now. Within minutes, they had saddled the horses and erased what signs they could of their presence at the line shack. The eastern sky was brightening rapidly as they mounted up and rode out, heading northeast across a landscape of rolling hills and scattered sagebrush. If we can reach the North Platte River, we might lose them, Isaiah explained as they rode. It's running high with snowmelt this time of year. They pushed their tired horses as hard as they dared, constantly checking behind them. The dust cloud grew larger, the riders more distinct, 6 men, heavily armed, closing the distance with fresh mounts. By mid-morning, the pursuit had narrowed to less than a mile. Isaiah led them into increasingly rugged terrain, seeking any advantage that might slow their hunters. There. He pointed ahead to a line of cottonwoods marking a watercourse. The Platte is just beyond those trees. As they approached the river, Fiona could hear the rush of water much louder than she'd expected. When they broke through the tree line, she understood why. The Platte was a churning mass of muddy water, swollen with spring runoff, at least 100 yards wide at this crossing. Isaiah reined in his horse, surveying the dangerous water with a grim expression. It's higher than I expected. We'll have to find another way across. A rifle shot cracked through the air, kicking up dirt near Isaiah's horse. The animal reared in alarm, nearly unseating him. No time, Fiona cried, pointing to the riders emerging from the trees behind them. Isaiah made a split-second decision. Follow me, stay close to my horse. The current's strong. He urged his mount into the water, and Fiona followed, gasping as the cold water surged around her legs, then her waist as the horses lost their footing and began to swim. The current immediately caught them, dragging them downstream as they struggled toward the opposite bank. Another shot rang out, sending water spraying near Fiona's head. She clung desperately to her horse's mane, the reins tangled in her fingers. Halfway across, disaster struck. Fiona's mare, exhausted from the long chase, faltered in the current. Water surged over Fiona's head, the shock of cold stealing her breath. She lost her grip on the reins, tumbling into the rushing water. For terrifying moments, the world narrowed to a chaotic swirl of brown water and the distant sound of shouting. Fiona fought against the current, her waterlogged clothing dragging her down, her lungs burned for air. Suddenly, strong hands gripped her shirt, hauling her upward. Her head broke the surface and she gasped desperately for breath. Isaiah had turned his horse back and was pulling her toward him, one arm extended. "Grab on," he shouted over the roar of the water. Fiona reached for him, their hands connecting. With tremendous effort, Isaiah pulled her across his saddle. His horse, struggling against the combined weight, somehow maintained its forward momentum. Bullets peppered the water around them as Ezekiel's men fired from the bank, but the distance and the moving targets made accuracy nearly impossible. By the time they reached the far shore, dragging themselves onto the muddy bank, their pursuers had ceased firing. Fiona collapsed onto the ground, coughing up river water, her entire body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Isaiah dismounted beside her, his own breathing labored. "Your horse?" he asked between breaths. Fiona looked back across the river. Her mare had managed to reach the same bank they had left, where one of Ezekiel's men was already securing it. "Gone," she said, another wave of coughing overtaking her. Isaiah helped her to her feet. "We'll have to share mine. Can you stand?" Fiona nodded, though her legs felt like rubber. Her borrowed clothes clung to her, heavy with water, and she'd lost her hat in the river. Isaiah's horse stood nearby, sides heaving but still upright, a testament to the animal's endurance. Across the river, Ezekiel's men had retreated from the bank, apparently discussing their options. The Platte was too dangerous to cross on horseback, as Fiona and Isaiah had just demonstrated. They would need to find another crossing, which would cost them hours. "We've bought some time," Isaiah said, helping Fiona mount his horse before swinging up behind her, "but we need to keep moving." Fort Laramie is still a day's ride east. Fiona leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain her posture. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, his body warm against her chilled skin. "Thank you," she murmured, "for coming back for me." Isaiah's voice was gruff in her ear. "I don't leave people behind, not ever." They rode eastward at a steady walk, the horse too tired for anything faster. With Fiona's added weight and their waterlogged condition, progress was painfully slow. By evening, they had covered less than 10 miles and Fort Laramie remained a distant goal. As darkness fell, Isaiah guided them into a small copse of trees. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he decided. "The horse can't go on without food and rest, and neither can we." They dismounted stiffly, both feeling the effects of their river ordeal and long hours in the saddle. Isaiah cared for the horse while Fiona gathered dry sticks for a small fire. "Is it safe to light a fire?" she asked as Isaiah returned. "Not really," he admitted, "but we need to dry out or risk fever. I'll keep it small." The tiny flame was barely visible beyond their immediate vicinity, but its warmth was precious. They huddled close to it, spreading their sodden outer garments on nearby branches to dry. "We lost the saddlebags in the river," Isaiah noted grimly. "No food left." Fiona nodded, her stomach clenching with hunger. "How far to Fort Laramie now?" "About 30 miles, with one tired horse carrying double, most of tomorrow if we're lucky." The ledgers containing the evidence against Ezekiel were safe at least. Isaiah had kept them inside his coat, and though damp around the edges, the documents were still readable. As the night deepened around them, Fiona found herself drifting in and out of an exhausted half-sleep, her head eventually coming to rest on Isaiah's shoulder. He remained alert, one arm around her for warmth, the other hand near his gun. "Isaiah," she murmured, hovering on the edge of sleep, "what will you do when this is over? When Blackburn is arrested?" He was silent for so long that Fiona thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Find the next one. There are more men like Blackburn out there." "Is that all?" she asked, lifting her head to look at him. Just an endless hunt, something vulnerable flickered across his face in the firelight. What else is there for me? The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither dared voice. Instead, Fiona settled her head back on his shoulder, and Isaiah's arm tightened slightly around her. They dozed fitfully through the night, taking turns to keep watch and tend the small fire. By dawn, their clothes were merely damp rather than soaking, and both felt somewhat restored despite their hunger and fatigue. The final leg of their journey began in mist-shrouded morning light. Isaiah's horse, having rested and grazed through the night, moved with renewed energy despite its double burden. They followed the course of the river, now keeping a safer distance from its treacherous waters. By mid-morning, the landscape began to change subtly. More signs of human habitation appeared. A rutted wagon road, fence posts marking property boundaries. In the distance, threads of smoke rising from chimneys. "We're getting closer to civilization," Isaiah observed. "Fort Laramie is just beyond those hills." The knowledge gave them fresh determination, but also heightened caution. Ezekiel's influence might extend even to the outskirts of the fort. Just past noon, they crested a rise and saw Fort Laramie spread before them in the valley, the stars and stripes flying above the parade ground. After their ordeal in the wilderness, the sight of the military outpost with its orderly buildings and bustling activity seemed almost unreal. "We made it," Fiona breathed, relief washing through her. Isaiah's expression remained guarded. "Not quite yet. We still need to get inside and find Marshal Daniels. Stay alert." They approached the fort on the main road, Isaiah's hand never straying far from his weapon. As they neared the entrance, a patrol of blue-uniformed cavalry soldiers rode out to meet them. "Halt and identify yourselves," the sergeant in charge commanded, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Isaiah straightened in the saddle. "Isaiah Xavier, Pinkerton Detective Agency." "I need to speak with U.S. Marshal James Daniels immediately. It's a matter of federal importance." The sergeant eyed them skeptically. Their bedraggled appearance hardly suggested federal agents. "And the young man with you?" "Woman," Fiona corrected, pulling off her hat to reveal her face more clearly. "Fiona Grant, I'm a witness." The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. After a moment's consideration, the sergeant nodded. "The marshal arrived 2 days ago. Follow me." Relief flooded through Fiona as they passed through the fort's gates. For the first time since fleeing Lusk, she felt truly safe, surrounded by the authority and protection of the U.S. Army. Marshal Daniels was a burly man with a salt and pepper beard and piercing eyes that missed nothing. He received them in the fort's headquarters building, listening intently as Isaiah explained their journey and presented the recovered ledgers. "Blackburn," Daniels growled, examining the damning financial records. "We've been after him for years, but never had enough evidence to make it stick. This changes everything. His men are still searching for us," Isaiah pointed out, "and he'll realize soon enough where we've gone." Daniels nodded grimly. "I'll telegraph the territorial governor for reinforcements. We'll have a proper force ready within days to take Blackburn into custody." He turned his attention to Fiona. "Miss Grant, we'll need your testimony as well. Can you identify the girls mentioned in these books?" "Many of them," Fiona confirmed. "I lived and worked alongside them at the Silver Dollar." "Good," Daniels said. "In the meantime, you both need rest and medical attention. I'll arrange quarters for you here at the fort." As they were escorted to the fort's infirmary, Fiona felt the full weight of their ordeal finally settle on her shoulders. They had made it. They were safe. Ezekiel Blackburn would face justice for his crimes, and yet a new uncertainty loomed before her. What would happen now? Where would she go? The world suddenly seemed vast and unknowable after the confined existence she had known in Lusk. The fort's doctor examined them both, treating minor injuries and prescribing rest and nourishment. They were given separate quarters in the officers' section of the fort, a luxury that felt almost overwhelming after their desperate flight across the wilderness. Clean, fed, and dressed in borrowed clothes, Fiona stood at the window of her room that evening, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. A soft knock at her door drew her attention. Isaiah stood in the hallway, similarly transformed by clean clothes and a fresh shave. For the first time, Fiona saw him without the tension of pursuit or the vigilance of a manhunter. He seemed younger, the hard lines of his face softened. "How are you feeling?" he asked, maintaining a respectful distance. "Better," Fiona replied, "though I still can't quite believe we're here, that it's over." "Not quite over," Isaiah corrected gently. "Blackburn is still free, but he won't be for long." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Fiona voiced the question that had been pressing on her mind since they arrived at the fort. "What happens now? To me, I mean, I have no home, no family, no means to support myself." Isaiah seemed to hesitate, choosing his words carefully. "The Pinkerton Agency often provides for witnesses in federal cases. They could arrange passage east for you, perhaps even employment in one of the larger cities." "Is that what you think I should do?" Fiona asked, searching his face. "Go east, start over somewhere far from here." "It would be safer," Isaiah acknowledged. "Blackburn has a long reach, even from prison." Fiona stepped closer to him, summoning courage she hadn't known she possessed. "And what about you? Will you continue hunting men like Blackburn until one of them finally kills you?" Isaiah's eyes widened slightly at her directness. "It's what I do, what I know." "It's not all you know," Fiona countered softly. "I've seen the man beneath the hunter, Isaiah, the one who risked his life to save a saloon girl he barely knew. The one who holds on to justice because he couldn't save his sister." Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "Fiona, I don't want to go east," she interrupted. "Not alone, not to become a clerk or a factory worker in some crowded city where I know no one." Isaiah took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "What do you want then?" "A future," Fiona answered simply. "One where I'm not running or hiding or pretending. One where I can use what I know about Blackburn's operations to help other women trapped as I was." She took a deep breath. "And I want you in that future, Isaiah Xavier, if you want to be there." For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, a man accustomed to pursuing justice rather than happiness. Then, slowly, he reached out to take her hand. "I've been alone for a very long time," he said quietly. "Hunting men like Blackburn, watching my back, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. I told myself it was necessary, that it was the price of the path I'd chosen. And now—" Fiona prompted, her heart beating faster as his fingers entwined with hers. "Now I'm standing here with a woman braver than any I've known, who makes me wonder if there might be more to life than vengeance." A smile, his first genuine smile since she'd met him, transformed his face. "Yes, Fiona Grant, I want to be in that future with you, however it unfolds." The world seemed to still around them as Isaiah drew her gently into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise, a beginning rather than an ending. In the days that followed, events moved swiftly. Marshal Daniels, armed with the evidence from Blackburn's ledgers and reinforced by a company of cavalry, led a raid on the Silver Dollar Saloon. Ezekiel Blackburn was arrested along with his main associates. The women held in debt bondage were freed, many of them choosing to testify against their former captor. Isaiah and Fiona remained at Fort Laramie, assisting the federal prosecutors in building their case. Their shared ordeal had forged a bond between them that deepened with each passing day. What had begun as a desperate alliance had blossomed into something neither had expected to find: love, blooming like a desert flower after rain. 3 months after their flight from Lusk, they stood together on the fort's parade ground, watching as Ezekiel Blackburn and 5 of his lieutenants were loaded into a prison wagon for transport to Cheyenne, where they would stand trial for their crimes. "It doesn't seem quite real," Fiona said as the wagon rumbled through the fort gates, "after all this time to see him in chains." Isaiah squeezed her hand gently. "It's real, he'll never hurt anyone again." "And the others like him?" Fiona asked, knowing Isaiah's thoughts. "They're still out there," he acknowledged. "But now we have a blueprint for bringing them down." Blackburn's ledgers revealed connections to operations in Colorado, Montana, even California. Fiona noted his use of "we" with quiet satisfaction. Over the past months, They had discussed their future extensively. Isaiah had accepted a position with the Justice Department, coordinating efforts against trafficking networks across the Western Territories. Fiona, with her first-hand knowledge of these operations, would work alongside him as a special consultant. "I received a letter from Lucy yesterday," Fiona said as they walked back toward their quarters. Lucy had been one of the girls freed from the Silver Dollar, now staying with relatives in Denver. "She says 3 more of the girls have found legitimate employment. The support fund is helping." Isaiah nodded approvingly. Part of Blackburn's seized assets had been allocated to assist his victims in rebuilding their lives, a program Fiona had helped establish. "I also received a letter," Isaiah said, a hint of mystery in his voice, "from a friend in Cheyenne. He mentioned a small property for sale just outside the city. A house, some land, close enough to the territorial offices for our work, but far enough for privacy." Fiona stopped walking, turning to face him. "Isaiah Xavier, are you suggesting we set down roots?" He smiled, the expression coming more naturally to him now. "I'm suggesting a home, Fiona, something neither of us has had for too long." He took both her hands in his. "I'm also suggesting marriage, if you'll have me." Joy blossomed in Fiona's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "I will have you, Isaiah, for all the days to come." Their wedding took place at Fort Laramie 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony attended by Marshal Daniels, several of the women they had helped free from Blackburn's clutches, and a handful of soldiers who had assisted in the raid. Walter, the old piano player from the Silver Dollar, had somehow made the journey to play for them, his rheumatic fingers finding strength for the wedding march. As Fiona and Isaiah exchanged vows beneath the clear Wyoming sky, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From captivity to freedom, from isolation to connection, from fear to love. "I, Isaiah Xavier, take you, Fiona Grant, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Isaiah's deep voice carried across the hushed gathering. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Fiona repeated the vows, her voice clear and unwavering, she thought of that night in the Silver Dollar Saloon when a tall stranger had walked in and changed her life forever. How strange and wonderful that the threat that had kept her captive had ultimately led to her freedom, and that the man who had come hunting a criminal had found love instead. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah gathered her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their commitment and promised a future neither had dared imagine just months before. Their new home outside Cheyenne became both haven and headquarters, a place of peace and purpose. Isaiah's work with the Justice Department took him across the territories, but he always returned to Fiona, bringing stories of progress in their shared mission to dismantle the criminal networks that had once seemed untouchable. Fiona, meanwhile, established connections with churches and women's groups throughout the region, creating a network to identify and assist women trapped in situations similar to her own. Her first-hand experience made her a powerful advocate, and territorial officials increasingly sought her counsel on matters related to exploitation and trafficking. In the spring of 1880, nearly 2 years after their escape from Lusk, Fiona and Isaiah welcomed their first child, a son they named Thomas, after Isaiah's father. As Fiona cradled their newborn, Isaiah sitting beside her on their bed with wonder in his eyes, she reflected on the unlikely path that had led them here. "I never thought I'd have this," she said softly, watching Thomas's tiny fingers curl around Isaiah's larger one. "A family, a purpose, love." Isaiah leaned forward to kiss her forehead gently. "Nor I. For years, all I had was the hunt and the hollow satisfaction of justice served. You gave me something to live for, not just something to fight against." "We gave it to each other," Fiona corrected, smiling up at him. "And now we've given it to him." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Xavier household expanded again with the arrival of twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, in the summer of 1882. Their home, once a simple structure, grew to accommodate their family and frequent visitors, women needing temporary sanctuary, officials seeking consultation, friends passing through. By 1885, Isaiah had been promoted to chief federal investigator for the Wyoming Territory, a position that allowed him to coordinate efforts against organized crime while spending more time with his growing family. Fiona's network of safe houses and employment assistance for vulnerable women had expanded across 3 territories, with support from both government agencies and private philanthropists. On a warm evening in July 1888, 10 years after their flight from Lusk, Fiona and Isaiah sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the golden light of sunset. Thomas, now 8, was teaching his 6-year-old sisters how to lasso a fence post, all 3 laughing as the rope repeatedly missed its target. "A letter came today," Isaiah said, handing Fiona an envelope bearing an official seal. "From the governor's office." Fiona opened it, her eyes widening as she read. "They want to appoint me to the Territorial Commission on Women's Legal Protections, a full voting position." Isaiah smiled, pride evident in his expression. "They'd be fools not to. No one understands the issues better than you do." Fiona folded the letter, watching her children play as she considered the offer. 10 years ago, I was trapped in a saloon, believing I had no future beyond serving drinks until Ezekiel Blackburn decided otherwise. And now you're changing the world," Isaiah finished, taking her hand. "One woman at a time." Fiona leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "We're changing it together." As darkness fell and they called the children in for supper, Fiona thought about the countless women who had passed through their home and their program over the years. Many had gone on to build new lives as shopkeepers, teachers, nurses, even a few who had followed Fiona's path into advocacy work. Each success was a testament to the possibility of transformation, of healing, of new beginnings. And it had all started with a desperate escape with a saloon girl and a determined detective riding for their lives across the Wyoming wilderness, carrying evidence of crimes and the first fragile seeds of love. "Mama, Papa, look what I found." Thomas called, running toward them with something clutched in his hand. He opened his palm to reveal a small silver locket, Fiona's locket, which had been lost during their move to the new house years ago. "My parents," Fiona said softly, opening the tarnished case to reveal the miniature portraits inside. "Your grandparents." "Tell us the story again," Sarah pleaded, climbing onto Isaiah's lap while Elizabeth settled beside Fiona. "About how you and Papa met." Isaiah's eyes met Fiona's over their children's heads, a lifetime of shared experiences reflected in that single glance. "Well," Fiona began, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, "it was a summer evening in 1878 in a dusty little town called Lusk. I was trapped in a saloon, thinking I might never see the world beyond its walls again. And then the doors swung open, and the bravest, most stubborn man I've ever known walked in." As she recounted their tale, softening some details for young ears, but preserving the essential truth of their journey, Fiona watched her children's rapt faces in the lamplight. They had heard the story many times before, but never tired of it. It was their heritage, after all, a legacy of courage, justice, and love that had transformed not only their parents' lives but countless others. Later, with the children tucked into bed, Fiona and Isaiah stood together at their bedroom window, gazing out at the star-filled Wyoming sky. "Any regrets?" Isaiah asked, his arms encircling her from behind. Fiona leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his presence, still a marvel to her after all these years. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step of our journey, even the painful ones, led us here." "How could I regret that?" Isaiah turned her in his arms, studying her face with the same intensity he had shown that first night in the Silver Dollar Saloon. But now, his eyes held not just determination, but a depth of love that had grown with each passing year. "I went into that saloon looking for evidence against a criminal," he said softly. "Instead, I found the other half of my soul. And I was a captive waiting for rescue," Fiona replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. Only to discover I had the strength to save myself with the right partner beside me. Their lips met in a kiss that held the familiarity of a decade together, yet retained the spark that had first ignited between them. As moonlight spilled through the window, painting silver patterns across their bedroom floor, Fiona Grant Xavier gave thanks for the strange, wonderful twist of fate that had brought a mysterious cowboy into a saloon in Lusk, Wyoming, and changed not just her life, but the lives of countless women who would follow the path to freedom they had blazed together.